Welcome to the family meeting, and welcome to the family meeting with the substitute teachers. Monique is on a little vacation for half the week. She went to have a good time in another state and meet up with a friend who was visiting in the States from South Africa. So we're going to carry on without her. And I've got some great dialogue partners today. We got the one and only Kevin Briggins, our managing director at the Center for Biblical Unity, as well as our friend, Dr. Jeff Degner from Cornerstone University there in, what is that, Grand Rapids, Michigan?
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Although, Kevin, you'll be happy to see right up here, I got the War Eagle.
I see.
Got my Auburn banner. Spent some time there last week and was happy to find out that that's your hometown. So
it is.
Cool
it
connections.
is. We got to connect next time.
Yeah.
You got it.
So Dr. Degner, I'm going to call him Jeff. He's part of our academic advisory council at the Center for Biblical Unity. And this podcast is sponsored by the Center for Biblical Unity. And this is kind of our more informal news of the week type of podcast that we do on Wednesdays or Thursdays, depending on when Monique gets around to it. And we are just excited to have Jeff with us because our academic advisory council is a critical part of our ministry where they advise us on a wide range of issues: theology, philosophy, law, social work, and in Jeff's case, economics. And so going to be getting his expertise on some issues today. So go check out more about the Academic Advisory Council over at our website at centerforbiblicalunity.com. All right, guys. I feel like nearly every topic in the news right now has some connection to economics. So I'm glad, Jeff, you're here to help us. Yeah. Let's kick things off with last week toward the end of the show. We had a commenter come on and was very socialist sympathetic and really wanting to blend socialism and Christianity. And I was kind of taking some quick issue. It's hard when there's just commenters and you're not talking face to face. It's not always easy to know where people are coming from. But I did make a post then after the show that I'm going to put up here on the screen really quick. And I just posted like some extra resources for the commenter to maybe consider. And I said toward the end of the family meeting last week, we had a commenter come on who was promoting a blending of Christianity and socialism. Kind of took issue with that claim. And I posted a number of links to the Just Thinking podcast. Our friends Virgil and Daryl have a number of kind of entry-level discussions of theology and socialism and some of the philosophical, theological problems with the framework. But to my surprise, it got 108 comments and 28 shares, which is
it took off
quite a lot. And there was quite a lot of sympathy for blending Christianity and socialism. So maybe we'll start there this week. And from your perspective as a Christian and as someone with expertise in economics, what some of your thoughts are on that.
Well, I appreciate, first of all, the hospitality for you having me on, and appreciate the both of you and the great work you're doing. When it comes to the term socialism, I think we've got to be real careful to be precise in our definitions.
Okay.
There are a lot of young folks today that toss around this word and express sympathy with it, but they haven't read Marx, they haven't read Engels and the clear definitions that they set out. And the base definition of socialism, according to the originators, is that you need to abolish three institutions in order to create conditions for the new socialist man, right? This is the sociology that goes with it, but you got to get rid of three things. First, private property. Second, the price system which follows. And third, the nuclear family. Those have got to go.
That comes from the original writings. That's not just Jeff Degner's opinion on things.
Yeah. And in fact, just a quick history piece here, Lenin instituted that abolition of private property and prices, as well as, some extreme measures new laws surrounding family life. And in the first few years of the Soviet Union, the consequences were dire. You had mass starvation. The idea that you're going to get rid of prices meant that, well, the state's just going to distribute food and necessities through sort of a warehousing system with central planners in charge of distribution. Well, again, this had disastrous consequences, and then on the side of the family, there's some history that's been written on really some of the more grotesque, I'll use the word degenerate kind of practices that were encouraged by the communists when this was these kind of laws were passed. So those three institutions have got to go in socialism. Now, the person who jumped on, I doubt that that's what they were talking about. I
They're
doubt.
talking about helping the poor. They
Right.
always cite Matthew 24, helping the
Right.
least of these, and
Mhm.
that is a mechanism
Mhm.
that Christians ought to be able to get behind. And, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a newish political party that it's not the Christian Socialist Party, but it's basically democratic socialism under the banner of
Yeah.
Christianity. And
Yeah.
there's a gentleman named Justin Giboney who runs the AND campaign, and he's really in favor of promoting this other party.
Okay.
And based on their website, it does seem to be a blending of Christianity and socialism under the guise of helping the poor.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I see you shaking your head in
I
dismay.
am.
What are your thoughts there?
This is one of my pet peeves.
Yeah.
Because it's so like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? And it is a complete and this is the thing, Christians should know better, because Christians should understand human nature better, right? To think that this is something that could that is going to fix or address poverty. You don't address poverty through this type of redistribution through government power, right? Because the issues that lead to poverty usually aren't associated with the system, right? The issues that lead to poverty are usually associated with culture, personal behavior, personal decisions, and those things never get addressed because you're constantly focused on the system. And so that is why in these blue states that invoke all of these social policies trying to replicate this stuff to end poverty, it just doesn't work, because human nature tells you if people don't have to work, they won't work. If people don't have, and so it's built on a lot of false presuppositions of human nature, not even on the economic side, just on how do human beings respond and act in, to their environment, I guess you can say.
Yeah. Well, you bring up human nature, and that's one of the things I've been concentrating on in the last few months, just in my own personal study and thinking about what economics really is. And, we mentioned before jumping on the air here that I'm a fellow at the Mises Institute, and it's a part of what's known as the Austrian School of Economics. And it's got a really tight focus on, asking the question, what are we really studying? Is economics all about cranking GDP and, hitting your inflation targets? That's not what economics is about at its core. It's about understanding human action and interaction. That's what we're studying.
Yeah.
And so if that's the object of our study, then we better understand what the human being is. And as Christians, we have revelation to tell us that. And so my study has gone back into Genesis, and I've truly been blown away. It's done my heart good to look at the Hebrew language in Genesis 1:27, right? So Genesis 1:27, 28, we have what is usually expressed as a command to be fruitful, to multiply, to spread throughout the earth, to subdue all living things, and to rule. Okay. So we kind of read that as a command, but the Hebrew, it's a beautiful statement. It says that God stooped down like a father would stoop down to bless his children. And he blesses Adam and Eve to be, not to do, but to be adders, multipliers, spreaders, subduers, and rulers. So it's an office. Okay. So to be human is to be those 5 things and express them in a way that honors God. Now, if socialism in its definitive form is to abolish private property, you've abolished 2 of the main categories in human nature. You've abolished that subduer office, and you've abolished the ruler office. You think to rule over one's household well. That's essential to being human. And so in that way, I cannot find socialism as defined by Marx and Engels as compatible with Christianity at its core.
Yeah. Jeff, I do have something, because you're saying socialism, but it sounds like you're describing communism. Are those the same thing?
Yeah. So for Marx and Engels, these were kind of interchangeable terms, right? And in either case, communism, right, is that final state where the state withers away, right? So they say. Right. And so socialism is this intervening period where you've got state dictating distribution, et cetera. Again, the abolition of private property. And it's in that state that they say conditions around us, right? Exterior conditions will create the new man, right?
Yeah.
And again, this is
that's why I go back
Christianity, right? And the new man comes within.
Yeah,
right?
That's why I go back to human nature. That's why I go back to human nature, because even though they talk about economics, it's really theology, you know? And so when you get the theology wrong, when you get human nature wrong, you get the economics wrong. Yeah. And that's why socialism and communism, whatever you want to call it, always destroys itself and never works.
So one of the foundational principles, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert, I did have to read some of Marx and Engels for my doctoral dissertation work, but I got to tell you, some of that stuff's fairly obscure.
Yeah, it's hard to read.
Yeah, it's tough. But from my understanding, this idea, these ideas are kind of premised on an operating assumption that humans are going to generally cooperate with each other, that when they're talking about shared resources, that we're going to not be selfish, that humans will be well-intentioned and well-inclined toward one another. And I think that this goes to your point, Kevin, of when you get your doctrine of humanity wrong, which I think Marxism, communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, has a wrong premise from the outset, that humans basically are good and want to share with each other. I don't see that playing out in human history, but I know that the narrative is, well, it's just never been tried the correct way.
Or the right people haven't been in charge of the distribution. That's another thing you hear.
Yeah, you need the right people. If you have, for lack of a better term, the righteous people in charge with the right values, that they're going to distribute it. And we're seeing this play out in New York City right now with Mandami, who is he is on record as a socialist in a couple of sound bites talking positively about communism. Democratic socialism. I was today years old when I realized the democratic socialism is just voting for it. And so that seems to be what New York City might very well do. And so if we have the right person in charge to allocate the resources, then everything's going to be okay.
Well, this is one thing that me and a few of our colleagues have been talking about, where we want to be careful, because I'm not going to deny that you take a look at the New York City situation. I'm not going to deny that housing prices are out of control.
Yeah.
And that this is impacting young people, especially.
Yeah.
Who maybe
my kids' generation. Yeah.
And I mentioned to you, I've got my my new book that's come out about a month ago or so. The theme is on inflation in the family, and one of the key ideas to look at there is how we've got an inflationary central bank driving ever higher home prices, just one category. And this is making family life harder and harder for people to enter into. And that's a frustration.
That's a very real problem.
Yeah. And so, if housing is out of reach, and you see this happening as a young person, a lot of them are being driven into the arms of people who will at least share the complaint. Right.
And they have like some semblance of offering a solution. Now, I think you and I would say, hold up, not the right solution.
Right. But it behooves us not to just like wag our finger at
I think it's a
the
great
mayoral candidate and say, well, you're a commie. But this is not going to help the situation in New York when it comes to housing. So you got to address inflationary policy. You've got to address zoning and housing laws that are restricting the supply. And so there's 100 interventions or regulations that need to be undone in order to create a more I don't know what the right word is, a more reasonable situation for young people to enter the housing market.
Yeah. I often talk about so it's funny because blue states are the worst at this.
Mhm.
And it has a lot to do with what they call the not in my backyard syndrome.
Right.
Right. Everybody says, yeah, we need more housing, or housing should be more affordable. But then when it comes to putting up something to be built in their neighborhood, everybody says, no, not here, you know? And so it just doesn't get done because, like you said, it's local zoning. This isn't about capitalism. This isn't about, the federal government. People try to make this a presidential issue. This is a local city ordinance issue. But I do have a question because it's kind of New York specific. Because I look at New York is just an island, right? That's the only place I know where you have to have your air rights. So you have a building, somebody can own the rights above you to build on top of you because there's nowhere else to spread out. Like, can they build more housing? Like, is there more room? New York City is the concrete jungle. Like, where are they going to build more?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a more approach, but a lot of times, zoning laws will prohibit what kinds of buildings can be close to each other.
True.
And so one solution here in Grand Rapids, we've got a number of folks at another place I'll plug besides the Mises Institute, over at the Acton Institute here in Grand Rapids. And they've got some folks like Seth Kaplan. Seth Kaplan is a writer who I believe he's at MIT, but he's talked about places like New York or more dense areas that you got to take a look at some of these mixed zoning uses.
Yeah.
So right now we know that commercial real estate in New York, from my understanding, there's plenty of vacancies there. And I've got a colleague just a little ways north here at Ferris State University. Alex Cartwright is his name. And Alex has gone into the business of converting hotel space into apartment space. Now that's an arm wrestling match at the local zoning level sometimes, but that's a real solution, a genuine solution for, kind of your working class families, that are in those urban areas. And you got a lot of commercial, maybe hotel space that has gone by the wayside due to the, kind of COVID response. That's another topic for another time, but all right. So I think that's a place where New York City zoning folks should be taking a look and have some creative use of real estate space. So sorry, a little long-winded there, but I think that's one way to address it in New York.
I think that what's important is, as we're talking about this, I love your point, Jeff, that socialists might point out real legitimate problems. Housing, another problem I can see happening is people are having increasing frustration about healthcare. And I don't know how it is in other states, but in California, it is such a scam. My husband was telling me the other day, we pay like $12,000 a year just to have the healthcare and then we pay even more when we go to the doctor and getting these exorbitant bills. And this is a real problem. And now I don't necessarily think that socialism is the solution to this problem, but I think that young people, I really appreciate, you're pointing out like their frustration with the quote unquote, the system, their frustration can be real, but they're getting funneled into a set of answers that those of us who are older, like we've already tried these answers, they don't work, but they don't know that. And so I think that a level of knowledge and sensitivity is important there.
Well, and to me, it comes down to one word. If you want to solve it, it's repeal or rollback, right? Because you take a look at those really two areas, and I'm involved in one of them. The American Enterprise Institute, every year they put out a graph that demonstrates inflation rates over the last 20 years. So they just back it up 20 years. And wouldn't you know it, the two highest sectors for inflation are healthcare and higher education.
Yep.
And now you got to ask, all right, where's the sort of deflation? Where are prices falling? Well, that's like things like electronics, television sets, your computers. So which of these things is not like the other? Well, if you take a look at those two areas of high inflation, the government has their mitts all over this thing, all over these sectors with subsidies, regulations of various kinds. And these are the things that are driving prices ever higher. And so in a sense, like there is a system and it's crony capitalism. That's the proper name for it.
And I think that's a distinction Monique and I are always trying to make is there's a difference between capitalism. I prefer the term free markets and crony capitalism. And I think that what many people call capitalism and the thing that they hate is really crony capitalism. That's this, in my opinion, it's this corrupt bribery scheme. And the Bible has a lot to say against bribery. I am for free markets because I actually believe that because of time I spent studying with the good people at the Acton Institute, that, free markets have more potential to lift people out of poverty. And you can lift a whole family out of poverty in one generation with the starting of a good business. And that's far more effective than subsidies and social programs that then can create multi-generational dependence. And so I'm against crony capitalism, but I am for free markets. My other problem with socialism is it confuses compulsion of helping the poor
with generosity.
Taxation. Whereas the Christian value is free will choices of generosity, compassion, and what we've historically called mercy ministries. And I feel like Christian socialists, they don't have a clear distinction between those two concepts of giving under compulsion through taxation and the biblical mandate of it is an extension of my righteousness and my love for God that I lend a helping hand to a family in my area or needs that I'm aware of.
Well, one of the New Testament passages that people who are calling themselves Christian socialists will also go to are the early chapters of Acts, right? They'll take a look at the situation. But I remind our students here, we walk through that here at Cornerstone and address this question. And let's remember, when the church was exploding at that time, who were these people? They were people, God-fearing people, Jews from around the world. And they were essentially in Jerusalem for vacation.
Right. For the feast. Yeah.
They're there for the feast. Right. So they're not equipped to live there for a long haul, but they're drawn into the church. And so, okay, well, look, we've got 3,000 people being added in a day. Where are we going to house these people? How are we going to feed them? So the church there takes the voluntary step to go ahead and sell what they had in movement of generosity. But it's clear that there's a context there. And then Peter at the end of that whole passage, right? Ananias and Sapphira, they come before Peter. They offer the gifts falsely. They lie about what they had, how much they had generated from the sale. And Peter affirms private property. He said, wasn't it yours to do with what you pleased? But why have you lied to the Holy Spirit? And so, that's a piece that I remind our students of, that Peter affirms private property and the voluntary, heart-based, non-compelled, or it is compelled by the Spirit, but not through coercion, not by the apostles, and certainly not by the state.
All right, let's move on, because I know Kevin's got to hop off here in about 25 minutes. So let's I want to have kind of a lightning round here. I got a lot of topics I want to have Jeff weigh in on. So tariffs. You and I have been going back and forth on email for several months about the tariffs. Tariffs is a big part of the Trump administration's plan. This is not an endorsement of Trump. This is me trying to publicly understand tariffs. And, if Jeff has anything to say, even in light of scripture, of the pros and cons of tariffs, maybe you can just give us a thumbnail of what is Scott Bessent, the Department of Treasury, the Secretary, what is he trying to do? Because either he's like a mad genius and he's trying to do something that nobody else has ever done, or we're all going to like ram this ship into an iceberg like the Titanic. Like, I'm not sure where we're going here.
Well, and as an economist, economists are often known for being sort of pragmatic, but as Christian economists, I want to keep coming back really to that passage I mentioned earlier, and thinking about the human person, right? So what is a tax? Well, a tax is it is essentially some kind of erosion of property rights. Okay, whether it's the property rights of the importing firm that's importing goods and services to the U.S. to sell to willing buyers, and so at that core sense, I've got a problem with taxation as a broad intervention. And maybe that's a whole other episode sometime. We could talk about what Jesus meant by render to Caesar, but it is, I mean, by definition, it is an erosion. Some might say an assault on that private property piece. And 2 of those 5 offices very much have to do with private property, and it's 2 of those offices of what it means to be a human. So now you've got importers who are needing to restrict supply, and they've got willing buyers on the other side. In the meantime, they've also got to say, hey, thanks, but no thanks to the international suppliers. Now, Brazil's a big one for me, 50%. Now, look, Lula's a bad guy, okay? Guimarães on the Supreme Court in Brazil, bad guy. There's no question about that.
So we're charging Brazil 50%
50
for everything that they try to bring into our country. They're going to get essentially a tariff as a tax of 50% on whatever. So if I need to import something, if I'm making a widget here and I need some.
Well, let's talk real here. You're getting your coffee from Brazil, okay?
Okay.
You're getting your Havaiana flip-flops from Brazil.
Right.
I mean, this is right. So these are some of these. So indeed, right. As the importer, your costs are going up. You're going to do less importing activity, and if we as Christians want to think about flourishing of people, not just within our national borders, what does that mean for employment opportunities for folks in Brazil? Now that's close to my heart. My wife's from Sao Paulo originally, but I
think you bring up a good point. Is it does seem like Trump is wanting to create these deals, as he calls them, these tariffs with countries so that it benefits the U.S. first. I mean, that's part of his America First policy.
Right.
Is that he's kind of telling them, hey, you're going to bring $300 billion into our country. You're going to build manufacturing here. And then we will only tariff you 15% or 20%. And now he's kind of using the tariffs as a lever for peace. Like recently in Cambodia and Thailand, he basically called up the prime ministers and said, hey, if you guys don't get together and make peace, I'm going to tariff the heck out of you. And I said, yeah, we want peace.
Right.
So then in 24 hours, they had a peace deal after displacing hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah. So there is, the interesting part in all these negotiations with every foreign leader, there's a bit of statecraft that goes on, and there's different issues in different places. So the Brazil case, Bolsonaro, who was very friendly to the Trump administration, is being prosecuted, we'll say, by the Lula administration. And
seems sort of a political thing to me.
Yeah. So like that's the card that's being played in the Brazilian case. The case in Southeast Asia that you mentioned, a different form of statecraft has to take, has to apply there. And so there's a lot to be seen here. But one of the key things that economists said early, some folks did, was that, automatically we're going to see a spike in inflation.
Yeah, that was the talk back in April.
Yeah,
inflation's going to go way up.
Right, and I was not ready to pull the trigger on that because what's happened is that what economists call intermediate goods. It's a lot of these goods that we use to make stuff that have faced some of these higher tariffs, and those costs don't get passed on, or we don't see it in what we call inflation, right? The consumer price index. That doesn't show up for a while. And so I think we'll eventually see it if
Do you think
these
it's too
things
early to
continue.
tell?
I think it's too early to tell, but it's also the case that with these GDP numbers that have come out, that by definition, the way that the GDP formula is actually built.
Well, and that came
If
out today.
yeah,
It's a 3, whatever a 3
yeah,
means. I don't know if that's
yeah,
good or bad or whatever, but it was a 3,
right.
and
So
they were
positive
celebrating.
3% growth over
Yeah.
this
Okay.
last quarter, and so but one of the things that folks need to know, and this is a little technical, so and I don't want to ramble on here, but in the GDP equation, part of it is what's called net exports. So for every dollar you export, that adds to your GDP. Every dollar you import, it subtracts, right? So that net export number, if you just you stop importing stuff, then that number is automatically, by definition, going to increase. And so it's are people's lives in the U.S. 3% better than they were a quarter ago? Maybe for some, maybe it's a lot better than that, depending on your sector, depending on your job, your region of the country, et cetera. But but I've been going on a little bit here. So Kevin, I want to make sure you get to
jump in, Kev.
Get to weigh in.
No, I mean, this is good. So I read Project 2025, and it talks about this topic a lot. And it talks about free trade versus fair trade. And
because from what I understand, that's the thing, is that Trump's claim is that he's making it into fair trade, that these countries have been ripping us off all these years with unfair trade, and he's just trying to bring equity or balance to it.
Yeah, and that's something that I was at the Mises Institute last week there in beautiful Auburn, Alabama, loveliest village on the plains, and so my colleagues said, look, and in fact, Ludwig von Mises himself, an economist who our institute is named after, at a point in his writings called for just reciprocal tariffs, just whatever another country is imposing on you, then that would sort of be fair and somewhat predictable, because that's one thing that markets and business people like to see. They like to see a little less hazy future. So if we've got certainty in the rules, then that creates a little more stable investment environment. And so the markets tend to respond better to some clarity. Now, in my perfect world, the clarity would be that we're not going to have tariffs, across the board. But
because we have free trade.
That's not where we're at. Yeah, because we have free trade and fair, in that we're all going at a 0% tariff. And so if I were king for a day.
So are you kind of like, are you in living in the world that we live in, where all of these other countries were tariffing us? I wasn't even aware of it, but in that world, do you feel like what Trump is doing, that this is bringing more fairness and equity? Do you feel like this is a step in the right direction, or do you have concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I have concerns. And again, it's about the statecraft between Trump and the individual people that he's negotiating with. Because I think what's become clear, you look at the EU situation, I mean, that he completely outmaneuvered von der Leyen. I mean, she looks very silly right now. And so the statecraft matters in these situations. And so, but what do I think is the best deal for Americans? Well, I think, again, I'll come back to repeal and rollback. Let's talk about what we've got happening inside our country in terms of business investment, in terms of regulation, taxation. Let's address that first, while also addressing these tariff issues. I've kind of stated what I'd like to see on that tariff front, but there's a lot of work to be done internally. And I think that Trump has taken steps towards that deregulatory move, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah. So for you, you'd like to see less regulation and less taxes, and ideally free trade. But since a lot of these countries aren't dealing with us in a fair way, you feel like maybe what Trump is doing might be a step in the right direction. But using trade as a way to broker other things could be kind of dangerous.
It can be. It can be.
Trump's wielding a pretty big stick there. And if he starts wielding the stick for unjust things, not just peace, but unjust things, that could be kind of dangerous, it seems.
And the thing of it is with tariffs, look, if tariffs were a path to prosperity, then we could solve all of the developing and poor countries' problems in the world. We could solve it overnight. Just raise your tariffs, right? But there's a lot more to it, right? There's the internal mechanics of the business environment. How do you tax your own people? Which, as we look at the Old Testament, we see that the kingdom was split between Israel and Judah over the issue of taxation. And the discord and the lack of productivity and eventually of civil war even. So, yeah, I don't see taxation either internally or externally as a path to prosperity or peace. And so,
so let's talk about protectionism, because that's a lot of in this conversation about tariffs. Because like being a free trade, the government isn't protecting any sector. So for people to understand, like the government would put tariffs on a particular product to protect the U.S. interest of we grow that own product. We don't want your products coming in here. So we're going to tariff your oranges because we got Florida oranges. We don't want you messing with our markets. Right.
Yeah.
And so even if the U.S. was say, hey, we're free trade, the issue is the rest of the world, they're protectionists because they charge us those tariffs to protect their own industries, right? So how does that, I don't know, how do we operate in that when doesn't it have to be played like on both sides have to agree to that? And then how do we compete with the cheaper wages in other countries, while we got people calling for, $45 minimum wage here in America,
Yeah. So on the first part, as far as other countries, having high tariffs on American imports for them, exports for us. Again, I think that they're hurting their own citizenry by and large. Right now, they might protect select industries, and if we take a look at those countries, we have the phrase "banana republics."
Yeah.
Right. And this is an indicator where you've got a specific sort of business interest. Now, in the historic case of the banana republics, they were actually U.S. interests in those countries. But today we see a lot of this where the protected industries inside of those nations that are blocking U.S. goods do so to support those favored few. And they got a really strong case of crony capitalism, if you will. Right. It's spurring tyranny and keeping that in place, keeping the powerful in place.
Yeah.
And so again, your average person is not really seeing the benefit of that. What they are seeing are the higher costs when they're already in a poorer state of affairs. So I think that's one thing to consider. And then the second part, Kevin, I'm sorry.
It had to do with like labor costs, right? And how do we compete with these other countries if U.S. labor is so much more expensive than Mexico and China and all these other places?
Well, again, I mean, right, two sides to that coin. So let's ask why labor is so costly in the U.S. So again, we can think about regulatory measures, et cetera, and even like payroll taxes. So I often do this exercise with our students, and I say, all right, let's talk about a $20 wage. What does your take home look like? Oh, well, it's like $14 an hour. And oh, by the way, your employer is not just paying you $20, right? They're forking out another percentage on top of that. It was 12.5% on top of that for payroll tax. If they pay you additional benefits.
Let me give you a practical example of what
California,
in California, if we hire somebody, let's say we hire them at $20 an hour, we're actually paying $30 an hour because of all of the additional taxes that the state and the government put on top of us for hiring that person. So it really
horrible.
It eats into like, hey, we could actually be paying people higher wages and letting them have that money to better themselves and their families. But we have to actually lower their wages because we have to account for, we're going to also have to pay these taxes on top of it. So it's painful.
Yeah. And there's other things that employers wind up doing. You might trim back hours, right? So trim back so that now they're not eligible for benefits, Or you go ahead and keep them at the hours, trim the benefits. Maybe sorry, we
Or
can't give you an educational benefit this year. There's a number of other ways where those workers don't get what they could. And so that's on the American side of the equation. On the other
in
side of
California,
the,
just so you know, in California,
yeah.
minimum wage for food workers. So if you go to Chick-fil-A,
Mhm.
food worker minimum wage in California is $20 an hour.
Mhm.
And so that's why to go buy one chicken sandwich is $12.
Mhm.
And it's insane because they're paying those people $30 an
Yeah.
hour
Yeah.
by the time they pay
To
the
flip
payroll.
burgers.
Yeah.
Well, we were in California 2.5 weeks ago prior to going to Auburn. So I got my share of warm weather. I feel good about that. But I noticed that the CEO of In-N-Out. So when we go to California, my girls,
Yes.
me too, but we land the plane. All right, where's the closest In-N-Out?
Yes.
They want to go. Well, they moved their headquarters to Franklin, Tennessee.
Yeah.
The corporate headquarters there.
Yeah,
in part
In-N-Out
because
just
of this,
started
labor
5
situation.
minutes from us. That's where the original In-N-Out is, like,
Oh, man.
really close to where we are. It's
The mothership.
it's just such an iconic thing here
Yeah.
where we live. But I understand why she had to make that decision. But anyways, we're way off topic. But this is, I think, difficult for me when I hear people like Mandami talking about $30 or $50 an hour minimum wage, or the very vague and ambiguous living wage, whatever that means. Like,
it just goes to show that they don't understand economics, and everything Jeff is pointing out, like what you're pointing out, like payroll tax and all this type of stuff. These people, the socialists, understand that for their system to work, they have to take more. So they end up raising taxes. They you end up paying more taxes to pay for their help.
And this argument that nobody can raise a family on minimum wage. Well, the fact is, you look at who earns minimum wage. Nobody is raising a family on that. The vast majority of folks who work at minimum wage throughout the United States are either 18 or younger or in their retired years. So it's folks that are like, they're retired, but they just want to get out of the house and work with the public, right? So and those people make up 1.5% or so of the entire workforce. So this argument that it is like some gross injustice that Johnny, 17-year-old, is only making $16 an hour. If Johnny's behaving himself, he's still living at home with mom and dad, and he's still going to school, and he's got a future, and he's picking up job skills. But at $30, Johnny's not getting hired.
Yeah,
Johnny's not getting hired, and there go those entry-level skills.
We got the self-checkout instead, because and I think that I always taught my kids, like, this is just on the real practical discipleship level. I always taught my kids to know the difference between what I always told them was a teenager job and what they were working for as a career, based on their talent, gifting, whatever God had given them, and what they were going to sow into, whether that was building their own business or contributing to somebody else's business. But there was no shame in, like, all honest work has dignity, is what I always taught my kids. And that but you have to know the difference between a teenager job and working in a starter job to go to work toward a career. Like, those are not the same thing. But I feel like these Starbucks workers who are going on strike because they want to have a living wage, it's like, you need to understand something. Nobody is paying $8 for coffee.
Yeah, being a barista is not a career.
Yeah. That's a teenager job.
And my daughter does. I have two daughters, one 23. She's launching into her career and has done very well. But she, like her younger sister, started in a couple different service industries. And man, you learn to be on time. You learn to work with a grumpy public sometimes, and work with coworkers who are sometimes a challenge. And you get to grow up in a way that, as parents, we're the prime disciplers of our kids, but, I'm not going to be able to really teach my kid how to deal with an angry adult over some trivial matter. I mean, that's a lesson that they can learn in the workforce. And if they're blocked through that super high minimum wage, And the statistics bear it out that it's minority kids who really get cut out the most. Here in Grand Rapids, we've got a couple different sections of town where, quite frankly, if minimum wage were to go up, the beneficiaries would tend to be, and statistically this bears out, it would tend to be upper middle class white girls. They would tend to remain at those jobs, and some of the other kids in the community here would be just cut out.
Interesting.
One illustration is that you set this first rung of the ladder too high to reach. Because these young kids maybe don't have the connections that Susie Sweetheart does, and she can get hired anywhere.
All right, Kevin, I know you got to run away
Yes.
to go do informed takes and continue the conversation over there. But thanks for hopping on with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you,
absolutely.
Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff.
I'll have to catch you at Chappie's sometime, my friend.
Absolutely.
It's going to be great.
All right, Jeff and I will stay here and we'll keep talking a little bit until the end of the hour. But
and then everybody switch over to informed takes, because we're talking about Mamdani and socialism and New York City and how you need to get out. So
I'll move to Auburn.
Yes, but don't bring your policies with you.
Okay.
So you can go watch what I call the twins, Kevin and Devin, over at Informed Takes.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. We'll see you,
Kevin.
So, Jeff, as we're thinking about wrapping up here, I want to give some attention. You've mentioned a couple of biblical insights, which I think is great. I would love it if we can just talk about, a theme that we've talked about on a past All the Things episode when you came on, and you did a blog post for us about it too, of just the watering down of our monetary policy, and how you see that connecting to scripture as a justice issue, and the importance of really thinking about money and economics from a biblical point of view.
Yeah, so the core biblical precept that tells us that we need to have sound money is actually the prohibition in the Old Testament on unequal weights and measures. Okay. Now, of course, people will think of this as, weights in the marketplace, measurements of size, volume, weight, right? But this also speaks to the weight of coins and the purity of coins. And there are several passages that speak to this. And when I read Isaiah chapter 1, that's a great place to start. Isaiah 1:21 and following. First verse there says that your silver has become filled with dross. And then it gives a cascading list of injustices that unfold in Judea and in Jerusalem. Well, and a lot of folks say, well, this is just kind of a figurative expression of evil deeds, right? That's actually not what it is. It is actually the case that the silver begins to be defiled with inferior metals. The kings in that era are condemned by Isaiah, by Micah, and by Habakkuk. These are overlapping. I got to double check on Habakkuk. But Isaiah and Micah for sure are overlapping. So they are speaking to the same leaders and condemning this practice of debased or devalued currencies. And so it goes through a cascading list of injustices that flow from that, right? So Isaiah chapter 1 is a great place to look at the effects, the social effects, the injustices that occur through inflation. I encourage folks to read that in light of that.
So do you see a parallel between that, like kind of the dross entering the money, which was used as a form of deception, where the person thinks they're buying so much, but really some percentage of it is, to use a modern parlance, it's like a counterfeit. It's fake. It's a deceptive measure to rob people. Do you see that parallel today in how our country has devalued our money, through the exorbitant amount of printing of money or going off the gold standard? Like, what do you see as the modern parallel to those warnings in the prophets?
Well, it's a it's a perfect parallel in many respects. You use the word counterfeiting. One of the best ways, the most concise ways to understand our modern central banking system is that we have the Federal Reserve, and it is protected by the federal government, and they are allowed to be the monopoly counterfeiter of money. That is what it is, and the effects of Isaiah chapter 1 are unfolding. And in fact, during especially that strong spike in consumer price inflation that we saw a couple of years ago, you started to hear about shrinkflation, right? So if you as a business owner know that every additional dollar you receive is valued less than the previous, and it's just a tsunami of this stuff in our economy, then what do?
That's why I was paying, like, I used to pay $2 for a bag of chips, and then in order to pay $2, I was noticing, like, the chips shrank.
Yeah.
Like, it was a smaller bag of chips, and that's the shrinkflation.
And so Isaiah says the same thing.
Okay.
He says your silver has become filled with dross, and your wine has become diluted with water. So what is the natural response when you know you're being defrauded? It's to retaliate, essentially. So you create a culture of distrust among people who normally, under sound circumstances of sound money, would have a voluntary exchange relationship that is quite cordial, right? I mean, it brings peace between people who maybe don't share the same interests or even the same faith or values, what have you. But this is a generally peaceful relationship that gets tainted, diluted, and we treat each other as people who are defrauding us, when in fact that's actually what's happening. You're passing counterfeit. One time I was prior to working at Cornerstone, I was working in the high school ranks, and I happened to be the yearbook advisor. So we're selling yearbooks at an event one time, and somebody passed a $5 bill that was clearly counterfeited. It was was that their intent? Did they just pull out of their wallet? Whatever, it's probably passed through the system. But immediately, this triggered like a distrust. I remember the person's face. I remember who it was to this day. This is some 10 years ago. And, don't hold it against that person per se, but the distrust that is fostered in society when this happens, again, Isaiah 1 is great. And it indicates that leaders who are practicing this kind of inflationary process, they aren't trustworthy either, because they're the first recipients. That's the important thing to remember. Who are the first recipients of newly printed money in our system today? It's government, so that they can run their deficits and spend on their pet projects. That is not the sign of a just ruler. And so the remedy to this is actually found in Ezekiel chapter 45, when Ezekiel is calling the rulers back to justice. He calls them to, guess what? Equal weights and measures, and ensuring that the money is sound. It's like the first step in reestablishing justice in the broader economy, which, let's be honest, it dictates so many of our relationships. Okay, you interact with an eBay seller from California, and I live in Michigan. If we do it well and treat each other well, that builds trust. That's a good thing. But inflation erodes that trust. It's one of the parts of what myself and a few others have called the inflation culture. It's a culture of distrust. It's a culture of materialism. It's a culture of buy now because it's going to be way more expensive later. It's a culture of rejecting thrift and patience.
Do you think there's any hope that these prices are going to come down? Like, because I don't know if you saw the chart that was circulating on X last week, showing the inflation. It was like it had been fairly steady under Obama and Trump 1.0. And then all of a sudden you see this crazy uptick during the Biden administration. Do you think there's any hope of those numbers starting to fall back to pre-Biden era? Or are we just kind of stuck with buying $12 chicken sandwiches?
Yeah, well, I'm hopeful, and it's not because of any wisdom of our leaders.
Okay.
It's not. I am hopeful because of what the back half of Isaiah chapter 1 says. And God says that when these injustices sort of reach their pinnacle, that he will bring justice, that he will refine that system, he will essentially burn it away and replace it with the soundness that he requires. And we've seen this in monetary systems throughout the centuries. Those powerful nations that inflate their currencies and use deficit spending and excessive borrowing. This is where the book of Habakkuk is instructive to us. Habakkuk 2, God gives a warning to nations, get this, that run in massive debt in order to fund their military activities. That sound familiar? Okay. And he says that he will break this system in his time, and that he will eventually restore justice. I think that that's where my hope is. It's in a fundamental change in our monetary system. Now, what exactly that looks like, there's an economist at the Mises Institute by the name of Steve Hanke. Steve has proposed a totally different approach to money production. I think it's a sound approach. That's one way to go. There are some folks that think Bitcoin is a way to do it. I'm a little agnostic on that one. I'm not sure, but it's got sound principles that our current Federal Reserve System completely rejects
So
and chases after
eventually,
deficit spending.
so you're taking issue. You don't think deficit spending is compatible with the Christian worldview. It
No.
waters down our money. It's an injustice. It's actually a pretty close parallel injustice to what the prophets talk about.
Yeah.
And that eventually a correction is going to have to come because, and we're not saying the correction is socialism, but that there's
Right.
going to be some
Right.
kind of correction because people have to come to their senses and realize this is not the way to go.
This can't go on forever. And one of the
Yeah.
things that I work through in my book with, not only the inflation culture, but actually even specific price inflation. Like our kids, or I should, in my case, say my grandkids, if this trend continues, the economics and the statistics show us that our grandkids, they won't show up. We won't have them because of what inflation does to young families.
Yeah.
That's a very sobering thing, I think, for Christians
We're
who
already
believe that
having-
God will. Oh, we're already seeing it.
We're already
already
having
seeing it.
population crash and
Yeah.
young people feeling like they can't afford kids and
Can't make it.
yeah. So
Well, maybe that's a topic for us to pick up sometime in the not too distant future, because that's a part of my work and it's a concern in the church. There's the expression, if your church isn't crying, it's dying. There's some truth to that. And so as a guy who works at a Christian college where we have another phrase, we want to ring by spring, like I rejoice in those marriages that happen here because frankly, at places like Cornerstone, you got a pretty nice pool of Christian potential spouses to choose from. And I think that we could talk maybe marriage and fertility choice sometime down the road, but the economics of that are really coming to bear, and we're seeing it in real time. So my prayers for families, for young people, and for justice that can come about if we, Lord willing, can use us to set these injustices aright.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me. This has been great. It's always
you, Krista.
a little bit like going to college when I'm hanging out with Jeff Degner. I'm always learning, but
I appreciate you and your faithfulness. And I know there's so much work that goes into what you do. It's not just, hey, throw up a podcast. You guys have so much behind the scenes work.
I have watched so many videos on tariffs trying to understand. And then you're writing me these lovely emails back. I'm like, I wish I was smart enough to understand this. Okay, I'm just going to watch some more videos because I really wanted to lead us in a good conversation about, I think money is a big part of the Christian worldview. It's important, but it's very complicated. And we live in a very complex world. And I don't want to shy away from tough topics because these tariffs and things like a minimum wage and socialism, these are all hitting us and hitting our kids. And we have to know what they are, but it feels like a foreign language, I think, for many of us. And so I always appreciate how you really just try to boil it down and help us understand and bring us along for the discussion. I'm going to put some links to our previous conversations in the description so that people can check out that information. And thanks so much for just hopping on kind of at the last minute and doing this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And I got a book in mind. I'll forward it to you as well as a free PDF from the Mises Institute on this question of inflation. So if that's okay for you. And
I can put it in the description as well. So
all right.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon. God bless.
Blessings.